Go ahead.
My apologies for not introducing myself. I'm doing this backwards. Excuse me. I'm Robert Henry. We own a 5-acre parcel in the very southeast corner of Newcastle. We're surrounded by a 35-acre parcel which contains the DeLeo Wall, which was issued a permit by the DNR in 2018 to be clear cut. Those of you who've been involved in city politics for a long time know it was a very contentious issue. It broke the Bank of Newcastle. That caused the Newcastle city manager to leave. A whole bunch of stuff happened. We are on a salmon-bearing stream, and it's both a pleasure and a burden to be on that. And we have marsh and wetlands and field and old-growth trees and a whole mixture of things that we like, and that's why I'm here, is to make sure I understand what's going on. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for coming.
You can give it a minute and then make your announcement.
So there's a slight difference, but you're looking at
This is the January 28th meeting of the Planning Commission. Normally starts at 6 o'clock. We're going to delay the start of that meeting till 6:10 in order to let some folks who have attended the workshop that immediately preceded this meeting get some of their questions answered from our technical experts that are here tonight. So if you're waiting for the official start of the meeting, come back at 6:10.
There's just so many strings and you just have that arm of like bearings and it's actually that I'm not very still it's two different I'd like to show you like that.
Yeah, and that's where it comes down to. I mean, I was told, you know, probably before you, that's true, this is absolutely five, but it makes sense for this. And then already have to learn, which is validated one of the really important, because it's changed over time, and I'm sure with development. One of the things in the,
And so, can you, it's on southeast northeast, so we're out in the highlands, and passing highlands. Yeah, one flower. Southeast northeast. Yes, and I'm right. I'm assuming the yellow is the string.
Yellow is the current buffer.
Okay. Well, the string is tiny. String is 2 feet across. It's nothing. So I don't know how.
Yeah, and so
That's
this is
scale.
the situation where this is the 25 buffer and now that's increased to 100 for property here.
And there's a trail that goes up.
Yeah, okay. So then this is your home here, and so the buffer, the new buffer, if it does anything, just lifts the orange. So this, that's this.
The dark blue is the current, right?
Yes.
Oh, and then the light blue is the new. Yeah. So just give me right on.
Yeah, just right here.
What does that mean for when I don't change the boundary or boundaries?
You don't have to do. Yeah.
I have no intention
So
of
you're
it.
able to maintain exactly how it is and just be able to alter that area that clips.
Okay, so you're not asking to change any of that. What about like the gentleman right across the street from me when it blew now, is it became, yes, yes. It does get into his property thing with the move codes. So what does that look like for him? It's even if, as long as he wants the rest of any new development, he's good.
He's good. I mean, if he was sort of wanting to take some recommendation or any sort of exterior remodel, then we really fall into a situation where if we have to go any closer to the stream than it currently is. So it's gonna be a side setback issue anyways, like anywhere outside is really
A patio or whatever. Right, okay, got it.
It looks like it's all disturbed now, so you have to have someone come on site and look at, prepare a report and say, yep. They might even find that it doesn't, like the buffer doesn't actually meet your property because the projections are for,
But I don't have to have that assessment done unless I'm planning on a development change. So, we don't need a development change, we're good. We got plenty of house and plenty of yard. And in fact, I mean, we've had trees fall from the middle of the creek onto our house. And they're over 150 feet easily. I mean, they're a good 200 feet tall. So I look at it like, you know what, at this point, we're just hoping they do fall down. We hope they fall down so that they clear. I mean, they're so saturated with water sitting in the middle of the creek anyway, that I'm like, okay, well, if they fall, then at least I don't have to worry about the land on my house.
that's a good point.
But this is good. This is good to know, so I appreciate that. We're good from the developers. Thank you. Good.
Did everyone else get theirs? Take a
We're going to start our meeting in a couple minutes. Or less. Tell me when you're ready to go. Good evening. This is the somewhat delayed start of the January 28th meeting of the Newcastle Planning Commission. I'm Charlie Gadzik, the chair. Call this meeting to order. Would you join me in a flag salute? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We'll begin with the roll call. Would you do that for us, Director Fitzgibbons?
I'd be happy to. Commissioner Keck. Here. Commissioner Lowe. Here. Commissioner Beeson.
Here?
Commissioner Van Atta.
Here.
Commissioner Blocker excused tonight. Vice Chair Troutman.
Here.
And Chair Gadzik.
Here. Okay, you have the agenda in front of you. Is there anyone who would like to make a change to the agenda? Okay, I'm seeing no heads nodding. We'll consider that approved. Next item is the minutes of our December 17th meeting, which have been distributed to you in advance. Does anybody have any corrections to the minutes? Okay, those are also then approved as written. That brings us to our public comment period. We actually have two this evening. One is just the general public comment period where you're invited to speak on any topic. We will also have a public hearing later tonight on the critical areas ordinance. That would be the better time to speak on that topic if you have something to say there. So we will now open the public comment period. Anybody would like to speak? You have 3 minutes to do so. Okay, I'm seeing no one moving forward to the podium, so we will close the public comment period and then move to commissioner comments. And I'd like to open those tonight. You all commissioners received a message from city manager about elections of the chair and the vice chair. We're not going to do that tonight. We'll do that in the February meeting. And this is a new rule that we've never been aware of before. But I wanted you all to know that if you want to serve in either of those capacities, that the next meeting will be the chance to nominate I think you can nominate yourself or have someone nominate you. I'd be happy to continue as chair if you want me to continue to serve. I just want you to know that. But we'll be conducting that at our February meeting. Okay. And with that, well, why don't we just move down to my left to Vice Chair Troutman. The first time he's been referred to as being on the left, I'm sure.
Very funny. Very clever. Hi, folks. Good to see you. Always good to be back with you. I'm grateful for the staff that's here, and I want to welcome all the visitors. I'm sure that you've got some interesting questions, and I'm just glad to see the public here. I'm always glad to see people and hopefully answer their questions. I think that's about it. I'm happy to be here, and also in the event that nobody else wants to do it, I would be more than happy to continue as vice chair, so for what that's worth.
And Chris?
Yeah. Just want to thank everybody again for the warm welcome last meeting, and just continuing to get up to speed with all the history and items that you've been working on, and excited also to just have some people here for our hearing and to hear what they have to say tonight.
Happy New Year to everyone. Happy to be here, and I'm kind of looking forward to seeing this comprehensive plan finally come to fruition. I mean, it's been a long time coming. I've been working on it for, it seems like forever, so looking forward to seeing that to completion. Thank you.
Thank you, the folks that you come in tonight. And I just want to mention one thing. I appreciate the staff for putting a lot of work on this critical area ordinance, and I think we saw a lot of new materials available now. And there is a study session in early February. I will not be there due to the vacation. But I do want to mention one thing. I would like to see, once we get in the workshop and going on the detail, if we can tell the residents, the homeowners, in kind of a more detailed steps if people need to build or expand the house when in the impacted areas, what kind of requirement steps, more detailed, I think it will be helpful, yeah.
Boy, Happy New Year. Kind of forgot it was our first meeting. Seems like we've had one already. But no, thanks to everybody that came out and all the people that, some people have left thanks to you. Maybe you'll see that on YouTube. But yeah, thanks to everybody and glad to be here.
Okay, we will move to reports. The chair does not have a report. Director Fitzgibbons, would you like to report something?
Just a quick report. Something that wasn't brought up in the agenda memo for tonight, but you might have noticed as you were looking through the packet materials, is that all of a sudden the definition section looks a little different. We are actually, and you'll notice this as future materials, we're actually reorganizing the definition section of the code. It's currently under 18.06. It's going to remain there, but rather than every new definition having a code citation, it's going to be by letter. So it'll be 18.06, 1 through, or 10 through 20.026, I believe. Katie helped us work on that. So you might have noticed that in the packet that those references just looked a little different. And the reason we're doing this is because some of our definitions got into, if you were looking at the decimal places, it'd be like the millionth place of decimal. So it would be like 1806, 240.02020305. So it just got a little too long. And so anyway, if you saw that and you were curious, that's what's happening. That's all I have.
That brings us to our public hearing. So that is section 8.1, to receive comments on the proposed update to the critical areas ordinance. I'm reading from a script now. Members of the commission, this is a public hearing. This evening we have Community Development Director Aaron Fitzgibbons to give us a short overview. At the conclusion of that overview, we will take public testimony. It won't be just the director, it'll be our consultants as well giving that overview. For the people in the audience, if you're here to address the commission, it's not necessary that you be a proponent or an opponent. You can just come forward, give your name and neighborhood for the record. If your comments are in the form of a question, the question will be so noted and answered after the conclusion of the public hearing testimony portion of the meeting. After the public testimony portion of the meeting concludes, the commission will hold a discussion. Commission members have any questions about the process? Okay. Then we will proceed to the overview. Dr. Fitzgibbons, or do we want to go directly to our consultant team? Directly to our consultant team. Starting with Katie Posler, Senior Planner.
Hi, good evening. My name is Katie Posler, and I'm a consultant senior planner for the City of Newcastle. And I'm here tonight to go over the critical area ordinance update. So, kind of like we talked about earlier, first going over what critical areas are. And they are environmentally sensitive areas that require special protection. And living in Washington, I'm sure you've encountered them. They include wetlands, streams, flood hazards, steep slopes, and geologically hazardous areas. And they're protected and regulated under Washington state law. Local critical areas ordinances implement these state requirements. And why the city is updating the critical area ordinance is because last year in March, the City Council adopted the 2044 Newcastle Comprehensive Plan, and that was part of a 10-year periodic update. And as a part of that, the Growth Management Act requires that when the comprehensive plan is updated, that the critical areas ordinance also be updated within a year. So that's why this is happening. So just to give you some background on what's happened so far, we've had 5 meetings with the Planning Commission from June to December to kind of go over the proposed changes, comments from other agencies, best available science, and implement some public outreach measures. And we have received comments from the Department of Commerce, the Department of Ecology, the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Department of Natural Resources, and the Snoqualmie Tribe, and we've done our best to incorporate some of these comments. The proposed code changes fall into 3 different categories. The first is state-required updates, which would involve incorporating current definitions, terminology, minimum standards. The next is housekeeping items, so correcting errors, reorganizing sections like Erin just mentioned with the definitions, and clarifying provisions. And then the next would be quality improvements, which are code refinements developed by staff with input by the Planning Commission. So there are 8 kind of big code changes that would affect development. I'm just going to mention them briefly and then I'll go into them a little bit further. But the first is the 10-foot building setback from critical area tracts and critical area buffers, but it does have a variance option for existing buildings that are non-conforming to that. The next is a new non-conforming section of the code that allows for buildings that are in wetland and stream buffers to be rebuilt and actually expand, a one-time expansion. The next is changing the mitigation monitoring timeframe from 5 years to 3 years for smaller projects. And then after that is clarifying that mitigation trees cannot double count or double dip in relation to tree retention requirements, that they're 2 separate areas of the code. And the next is a new process called the Wetland and Stream Preliminary Verification Process. And after that is a change to the Category 4 wetland size threshold and when you can remove or alter or relocate Category 4 wetlands. And then next, we decided to use the ecology guidance to update our wetland buffers. And then the last item we'll go over with Doug from Facet is the stream buffer increases. So the first item is reinstating the 10-foot building setback from critical area tracts and critical area buffers. And the purpose of this is to give space and maintenance for either working on the building or construction to protect that buffer and the critical area. And Planning Commission brought up the first time we kind of mentioned this item was to allow for a variance or an administrative variance option to pursue for existing buildings that are non-conforming to that standard because buffers have changed over time. And that administrative variance cannot reduce it more than 5 feet, so that's the limit there. The next section is a new non-conforming section within the critical area ordinance. And the priority in that section is to, when it's possible, to relocate the building or any other improvements outside of the critical areas and buffers. But there are scenarios, kind of like what we just looked at with the open house meeting, that sometimes the buffer takes up almost the entire property, right? So in relation to streams and wetlands, if there is a single family home in that buffer, it can be rebuilt in the same exact footprint or reconstructed or repaired. And then there's also going to be a new expansion allowance in the code. So that's a 500 square foot expansion on the ground level, so truly a building footprint expansion. And the rules around that is that it can't be any closer to the critical area than the existing building. And it has to be over previously disturbed areas, so areas that were maybe used for a patio or a driveway or lawn or garden. And also the allowance would allow you to expand vertically, so second floor as well. This graphic kind of helps explain that. So you can see that the home is in the 100-foot buffer from the stream, so it would be non-conforming. So if someone wanted to develop this property, they could build in the area where the number 1 is, which is outside the buffer, which would be the most ideal in the code. And then next, they could expand the existing building vertically or rebuild it in the same footprint. And then the third would be over previously disturbed area with that limit of 500 square feet, and then no closer to the critical area itself. The next item is mitigation planting requirements and tree replanting requirements. So in the code currently, there's requirements for mitigation planting in relation to a critical area. And then there's also a requirement to keep at least 25% of the trees on the property. And if you can't keep 25%, then you have to replant new trees. And so in the current code, it's a little bit confusing. If you were replanting a mitigation tree, would that count towards your tree retention? So the proposed code clarifies that they're two separate items and that trees are required for both. The next is time frame for mitigation monitoring. The current code allows for, or requires, I should say, 5 years for mitigation monitoring, but the proposed code would allow that to be reduced to 3 years for projects that are less than 2,500 square feet. And the reason that number was chosen is because that's also the threshold of when you can clear without a clearing and grading permit for lots that don't have a critical area or critical area buffer. The next introduction into the code is a wetland and stream preliminary verification process, and this does exist in other codes and jurisdictions. What it allows for is for property owners to submit a consultant-prepared wetland and stream delineation report early in the process to go over the category of the wetland, the stream type, and the buffer widths before they actually submit a formal application to the city. And the goal of this process is to make it a little bit easier to identify issues and to make the formal submittal more streamlined, because we'll have already seen that information and got to a point of agreement on the different categories and types and buffers. The next is a change to the Category 4 wetland size threshold. So currently, Category 4 wetlands that don't meet any of the criteria, you could relocate them or alter them if they were 2,500 square feet or less. The new code is a little bit stricter based on state requirements, and that would change to 1,000 square feet or less, that as long as they didn't meet any of the other criteria. Here are the wetland buffer changes that are proposed. So on the left side of the screen is the current code, and on the right side is the proposed code. And in the current code, there's two categories of land uses. There's low and then high to moderate. In the proposed code, there's going to be 3. Low, moderate, and high impact land uses. Kind of like I mentioned earlier, a low impact land use would be like open space or unpaved trail. And a high impact land use would be a commercial or retail development or a residential subdivision with more than 1 home per acre. And our proposal is to keep the low and moderate buffers the same, but to increase the high impact land use buffers, and that's based on the Washington State Wetland Rating System. Is the reason why we're increasing those buffers is to match those. The Department of Ecology does allow for them to be reduced back down to the moderate buffers if measures to minimize the impact are in place. So the code mentions a vegetation buffer, avoiding placing development that introduces noise away from the wetland or lights away from the wetland. And there's some other minimization measures as well. But if those are incorporated into the project, then the moderate impact land uses could be utilized instead of the high ones. So we're essentially keeping it the same, but with that caveat. Next, Doug will go over the stream buffers, best available science, gap analysis, and some more items. So I'll switch it over.
Before we move to the FACET presentation, I want to give the commissioners a chance to ask questions of Katie. Oh, okay, well, then I have a question. Could you go back to the slide that shows where the 500-foot expansion could go? So,
Yes.
My reading of the language applying to this, it may need some clarification just to avoid future confusion. So this existing language says that a one-time building footprint expansion may occur within an existing improved area of the site, limited to 500 square feet, provided the expansion, and here's the key language, does not encroach further into the critical area buffer than the existing development. So if you look at that picture there, the area labeled 3 is expansion into the existing buffer.
Yes, and
I know it doesn't go any further than the rest of the house, but I wonder if that language might need some clarification too.
Yeah. So this particular, actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because this particular diagram, the ideal location, as Katie mentioned, for expansion in a situation like this, where only half the home is covered, would be in areas 1 or 2. It would be hard to argue that the expansion should occur in location 3, unless the buffer was completely encompassing the home itself. So if the buffer went on the other side of that number 1, then the expansion could happen in any of those areas. But in this case, that 100-foot buffer goes halfway through the home, and so there would have to be a very strong argument as to why the expansion needed to occur within the buffer when there's plenty of usable space outside of it, in reality.
So to whom would that argument be made?
That would be part of the, so there's something called mitigation sequencing that is included when, and I know that Doug can talk about this a lot better than I can, but I'm going to try. But so there's something called mitigation sequencing, and when a report is provided to the city, we have a bunch of criteria that haven't really changed too much between the two, between the existing code and the proposed. And mitigation sequencing, well, the first thing you try to do is avoid critical areas and their buffers. Then the second is minimize the impact, and the third is to mitigate. Thank you. And so when you're doing, that's where your argument comes from. So when you're doing the sequencing in an issue, in a location like this, there's avoidance possible. Then minimizing would be to have it on the outside of the buffer. And then mitigating would mean if you were going inside of the buffer, you would have to do some sort of mitigation, which is usually additional planting, enhanced planting, native growth, and whatnot. And it does cost the homeowner more to have to mitigate than to avoid.
And so is that a state requirement that follow that process?
Yes, absolutely. So when you would actually encroach into the buffer is when the existing home is completely swallowed by the buffer itself.
So it wouldn't, an argument that I want to have an expansion that makes sense with the floor plan of my house and it goes into that patio area, even though it doesn't go any further than the rest of the house, that would not constitute an argument that would be persuasive.
Not as you've placed it just now. I mean, I'm going to look at Doug to see what, he may have gotten this question before. And you need to turn your mic on.
That is not a question that I've gotten before. Typically see this when, as you were describing, the home is completely encumbered and that there is no buildable space outside of the buffer. But if there is buildable space outside of the buffer, that's your avoidance, and so essentially that's where the addition on the house could go.
And I could maybe,
Commissioner Vanetta.
Oh, I was gonna, what? Okay, this is fun. So now what if area 1 though is your like 20, 30 foot setback from the street that you're required to have? And so the house is already at the setback? Then what happens? Can you build on the patio? Because you can't build in the setback, right?
Could you build north or south? Let's say, oh yeah, north is up in this instance. So you could build north or south.
Well, I guess with
Have
this,
to encroach
if
into
the
setback.
picture is the lot, in theory, yes. But what if there was only, they were already, had their 5 feet on one side, 10 on the other kind of thing?
Then yes.
Then the
So then
patio
you're
is,
looking at having to request a variance or you're looking at reasonable use.
gotcha, okay.
So then I think that would potentially hold an argument there. And I'm sorry, Katie, did you?
I just wanted to add that this graphic was from a previous presentation, maybe before we reworked it a little bit. So maybe at the next hearing, we can tweak it a little bit to make more sense.
Well, tonight's the hearing. Well, unless you just opt to have another hearing, but yeah.
I guess I meant for city
The next
council is
presentation.
kind of what I was thinking.
Yes, absolutely.
So I'm just curious, what would be a persuasive argument to make then if you wanted to build on that buffer area?
In the which area?
Yeah. So what if they wanted to build in the buffer area zone, and that's how the architect decided, it would look aesthetically good, what would be, what argument would the homeowner want to bring which might be acceptable to the county? Or
I think you'd have to be somehow encumbered by other codes to have that consideration. Critical areas codes currently have no variances allowed, other than what's called a reasonable use exception, which is, we're trying to minimize the use because they are a long, expensive process. And so that's where the 500 square foot addition comes from, and that's for properties that are completely encumbered by buffers. So the situation today, as it would be under the proposed code, is, again, that avoidance is really what we're looking for, unless you just can't, so, for some reason.
Thank you, Chair Gadsden. Director Fitzgibbons, who decides what a reasonable use exception is? Is that staff? Is that
Hearing examiner.
Oh, so it is a formal.
It goes through a land use hearing, with an attorney.
And before it got to that stage, to get to that stage, would it first have to be rejected by someone on the city staff?
No, so as soon as somebody applies for a reasonable use exception, staff can recommend or not recommend the process, but in order for the process to be completed, it has to go all the way through the hearing examiner. And the hearing examiner would approve or deny based on his knowledge of our law, and I say his because our current is Phil Olbrooks, but so based on his knowledge of the law and case law.
Let's suppose a homeowner wanted to build in Area 3. Because the homeowner was interpreting that as being a legal approach, how would anybody know whether that homeowner was doing something legal or not?
Well, that's a good question. So if it required a building permit, and they didn't apply for a building permit and they built it, and
No, let's assume they're doing it all legally. They applied for a building
oh,
permit.
that's how we would know. So staff look at various, when a home is submitted to us, we tend to look at the plat maps and as-built maps, and those tend to reflect, or if we just see that it's near certain topography, or depending on the kind of critical area.
So it would take a staff action to inform that homeowner that expansion into that area is not permissible.
Well, staff would then respond that it looks like a critical areas report is required based on what they're finding.
And so they get a critical areas report, and what does that then achieve?
So for any of the geological hazard, which we haven't really spoken about because they are changing, but that would be a geotechnical engineer would write that report. And that includes coal mine hazards, steep slopes, which we have quite a few of in the city. Even it can be erosion hazard areas, but those are less so. There are landslide hazard areas in the city. And then, so those are all the geological hazardous areas. And then for wetlands and streams, that would be a wetland biologist.
So that report will be prepared, and then the biologist would inform the homeowner that you can't build in that area because you're encroaching into the wetland, right? Is that the process?
So
And
they
then
would
what
go
the-
out and they would survey the site, and they would look for certain attributes of the site that would inform where they consider the buffer to be.
And then the homeowner now knows that that's not permitted.
Mhm.
And does the city know it's not permitted? Is that also part of the,
So they submit the report to us, and typically we have a peer reviewing professional who looks at them.
so it's all transparent to both the city and the homeowner?
Yes.
Commissioner Lowe?
Yeah, I just want to follow up the question on the consultant. I think earlier there's also requirement is like the verification. Is it right, the homeowner actually need to have a report from consultant first, then go to city, get the verification? So is the city staff doing the verification?
City staff, so that would be, again, we would consult out to a wetland biologist to do the peer review, someone who's qualified to do that review.
So is there also a list for the homeowners, like this is the approved consultant you can use, or,
So different jurisdictions do it differently. Newcastle does not provide a list of generally accepted. A homeowner could, and we cannot recommend, for liability reasons, we can't recommend professionals. People have contacted and say, who were the last 5 wetland biologists who worked on a project in Newcastle? We can give that information, but in this area, there are a lot of different firms who do this work. And the code does outline the certifications that are required.
Vice Chair Troutman?
Director Fitzgibbons, I'm just curious, based on your experience, how often does a landowner actually prevail at a hearing examiner's thing, trying to get a reasonable use exception? Is that a pretty low percentage thing, based on your experiences?
Yeah, I mean, in this situation, again, because of mitigation sequencing, all of the reasonable use exceptions that I have seen come through the city are on sites that are at least 80% encumbered. Maybe they have a driveway space in the front and they meet that setback and that's about it. So they do prevail, and it is an iterative process with staff as we can provide what has, precedence in the city does pertain in these instances. The homeowner goes through, their consultant goes through an analysis of looking what's reasonable in terms of other homes in the area, in terms of building. So every RUE that I've seen go through the city is approved. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions before we, yes?
I just have one more question. If we can go back to that picture, the layout. On the number 3, if number 3 today is patio, can the homeowner repurpose that area, make it a sunroom? And but it is still it will be considered as a previously disturbed area.
An impervious area is interesting because, so if that's concrete, and I don't have the code in front of me, so I'm sorry, I would have to look at it, but there may be an allowance in the code if that were concrete to allow it just to have a roof added to it because it's already impervious area. I don't recall if that's allowed in our code or not, but I don't know if you recall, Katie, but it could be a possibility. I'm sorry, for some reason I'm not remembering that.
Okay, thank you, and let's proceed with Bassett's part of the presentation.
Good evening again. I'm Doug Yormick, environmental planner with Facet, and here to talk about the fish and wildlife conservation areas. And critical area ordinances are supposed to utilize best available science when developing the regulations. And during the last CAO, the critical area ordinance update for Newcastle, company I work for, Facet, was then the watershed company, did a best available science back in 2014. So for this update, since much of that science is still valid, we performed an addendum to that best available science, mostly pertaining to stream protections. And we looked at recent publications from Department of Fish and Wildlife, and then other peer-reviewed research publications dealing specifically with fish and habitat in streams. So fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, these are areas that support species and habitats that are critical to our ecosystem. First, we identify and classify these areas based on state guidelines. That includes places with endangered, threatened, or sensitive species, habitats of local importance, and water bodies like lakes, ponds, and streams. These areas provide important functions and values, such as maintaining healthy biological, chemical, and physical habitat conditions. And then to manage them, we follow standards that include designated habitat areas and providing buffers from adjacent land uses. And then if there are impacts, requiring assessments to ensure that the impacts are avoided, minimized, and mitigated. So the biggest change between that 2014 Best Available Science report and the addendum was the guidance that Department of Fish and Wildlife came out with back in 2020, the Riparian Ecosystems Volume 1. So Department of Fish and Wildlife collected and synthesized all of the science pertaining to riparian areas along streams that provide critical functions to healthy ecosystems. So what they looked at was pollutant removal for protecting water quality, supporting aquatic and terrestrial habitats, such as recruiting large woody debris that create habitat complexity, and then regulating stream temperatures. The science that they produced uses a term called site potential tree heights as a method to regulate buffers. This is a completely new approach to what jurisdictions throughout Washington have typically used, which is a stream will have a particular set buffer, and instead, site potential tree height, those buffers can vary along that same stretch of stream, just feet apart from each other. So for Newcastle, this means applying this science means that stream protections will be based on the best available information to maintain water quality, habitat, and overall ecosystem health. They had a companion document, which were the management recommendations, and this is volume 2. WDFW recommends using site potential tree height to establish riparian management zones, or what we would refer to as buffers. This approach helps ensure that buffers are sized appropriately to maintain full riparian functions. This is a major shift for every jurisdiction in Washington, and to date, there's only a handful that have actually adopted this site potential tree height. They also show here that the minimum buffer recommended should be 100 feet, and that is the minimum width for pollutant removal for water quality functions of that stream, and that 100 feet should be considered the baseline for protecting both water quality and habitat. So utilizing these two documents together gives us kind of a science-based starting point for updating the stream protection standards for Newcastle. So as I was saying, site potential tree heights is a way to figure out how wide that stream buffer should be. The idea is that the buffer should be wide enough to allow the tallest tree that can naturally grow at that site to reach its full height. And they use 200 years as a benchmark. So what the size of that tree would be left to grow in 200 years. And this is based on soil type, the climate, and the ecological region to estimate that potential. Fish and Wildlife have come up with an interactive map that you can go and select a parcel to see what that site potential tree height, or at least what their predictive models for that site potential tree height would be. This would all have to be verified through a consultant when a development application was coming in or a building permit was coming in. For Newcastle, that site potential tree height ranges from 100 feet to 231 feet, and then the average throughout the city is roughly 196 feet. So taking this new information that we reviewed from Fish and Wildlife, we're able to synthesize into a gap analysis. So see where the existing critical area ordinance is lacking when it comes to implementing best available science. And for this, we primarily just looked at the stream buffers widths and then looking at buffer flexibility standards. So allowances to reduce or average those buffers, or in some cases, you might have a situation where significant development or roadway cuts through that buffer, and that there is a method to exclude that buffer from the opposite side of the right-of-way or significant development. So in developing the updated stream buffer standards, we kind of used this combination approach, using the methods described by Fish and Wildlife, using site potential tree heights, but also still looking at the predictive model that's for determining stream buffers that most jurisdictions throughout Washington are used to. The chart on the left represents the 4 key riparian ecological functions identified by Fish and Wildlife in that Volume 1 document. And this is called the FEMAT curve. So looking at that curve, you can see that there is a point of diminishing returns as distance from the channel increases. So we use where the asymptote, or where that curve starts to run parallel, where pretty much all riparian functions at that point are approaching 100%. And then utilizing this, that's roughly 75% of this ecological function, the distance from the stream. So using this percentage and then applying what we had determined site potential tree height for the area would be, we come up to a number around 160 feet. Our discussions with Fish and Wildlife, they've allowed other jurisdictions to use 150 feet for fish habitat streams. So this size allows for similar ecological functions as utilizing that site potential tree height. But applying it to fish habitat streams, because there is in the guidance and in the WAC priorities for andromynous fisheries and protecting those habitats. So for smaller perennial streams and seasonal streams that are non-fish habitat, we use the 100-foot minimum that Fish and Wildlife has recommended. So using both the predictive model where a stream has a particular buffer and the site potential tree height, we wanted to analyze what the different impacts would be. So on the left is the predictive model, and these are based on the updated buffers, stream buffers that are currently in the draft CAO. On the right is the site potential tree height analysis. And what we were trying to look for here is how many parcels would be impacted by the differences between utilizing what's in the code in the draft CAO now and what site potential tree height is. And what we found is that there is a very large increase in properties that are almost completely encumbered, so 80 to 100% encumbered. So utilizing the predictive model results in approximately 143 properties that would become fully encumbered versus the site potential tree heights, which is over 1,000 properties would be fully impacted.
And the predictive model is what is the basis of our recommendation that we're
Yes.
voting on tonight?
Yes. So then this slide compares two approaches for stream buffer widths. We have the current code and what's in the draft critical area ordinance. The current predictive model uses fixed buffers based on stream type. This is something that staff have grown accustomed to, developers, consultants. It is what has been used for buffers in Washington for decades. Site potential tree heights, the streams aren't classified in the same way. Each stream is treated the same, whether it contains fish habitats or it's just a trickle that flows a couple months out of the year. And so with that, each stream could have a different site potential tree height along a particular stream reach, where it might be 196 feet on your property, but if you go downstream or upstream a few properties, it might be 150 or 100 or 231. So there's no way to know fully what that stream buffer is, and that's where you would have to bring in consultants. Minimum buffer is 100 feet, and as I mentioned before, the site potential tree height value for all of the streams in Newcastle range from the lowest of 100 feet all the way to 231 feet, with a 196-foot average. So with the stream regulations, we've updated all streams, updated the buffers for all streams for type F and for the two type N streams. For buffer modification options, buffer averaging was retained, and then the maximum reduction point at any point is 25% of the assigned buffer. So buffer averaging is where you take a portion of a buffer in one area and then add it to another. So you can kind of open up some development. The total buffer area doesn't decrease. It's just where that buffer is located changes. Buffer reduction with enhancement was removed, as that was not supported by best available science, and then introduced an interrupted buffer standard, and that's what I was discussing before, where if you have a significant development block or a right-of-way that bisects that stream buffer, the area on the opposite side of that right-of-way or development may not be considered stream buffer, even though it might be within that 100 or 150 feet. And then there were just some minor updates, standards for outside agency permitting through Fish and Wildlife for stream crossings, and then updated references and guidance documents throughout the code section. And then for Lake Boren, to take a look at how to classify the buffer for this lake, because technically it's both a wetland and based on the water typing, it would be a stream. A lake, it would be a fish habitat lake. So it's technically considered both. So with this, since it's a fish, it would be fish habitat, it would have a 150-foot buffer. For the wetland, it's also a 150-foot buffer, but there's differences in the regulatory flexibility between what's in the fish and wildlife section and then what's in the wetland section. So a wetland can't, that 150-foot buffer for a wetland can be reduced to 110 if certain minimization measures are applied. That same isn't true for streams. The only flexible, regulatory flexible tool you have is buffer averaging. But there's precedent. Other jurisdictions have these types of situations as well, and many of them will regulate that lake with just a standard buffer. It might be 100 feet, you know, it's determined based on their, you know, what they deem appropriate for that lake. So there's ecological rationale for having a different type of buffer for a lake versus a stream, because lakes don't function like streams. There are differences between the habitats. You know, the primary functions for streams include, you know, shoreline stabilization and near-shore vegetation for litter fall and pollutant uptake, but there isn't a reliance for lakes on shading. So having large trees that are hundreds of feet away isn't necessarily going to do anything for the lake temperature, because the lake is exposed to the sun for several more hours out of the day. So our recommended approach is to assign Lake Boren with a 110-foot lake buffer that would coincide with the minimum for the wetland buffer. And then this aligns with regional practice and consistency with other jurisdictions. And then, any questions?
Commissioners? Commissioner Lowe?
Yes, I have a question on the Lake Borean. So I guess we compromise, or we try to say we consider it can be both wetland and streamline.
Mm-hmm.
But we are not applying the type F buffer.
Correct.
And we are saying it's 110.
Mm-hmm.
Are we considering everything around the lake, or specific area of the lake is 110, or everything around the lake is 110?
Everything around the lake would be 110 feet. And mention this too. So the buffer could have always applied. It's just that fish stream buffer was always smaller than the wetland buffer, so the more protective would apply in that situation. Since the wetland buffer is larger, it was the wetland buffer that would regulate where you could build along the lake. Now that the stream buffer is increased beyond what the wetland buffer is for that lake, now there were some issues where, you know, it would be 150 feet for the lake, but only 110 feet for the wetlands. And since it's not, lake isn't a stream, even though it has its fish habitat, kind of just use that wetland buffer as a guide instead of applying that full 150 feet, since it's not as necessary as they would for an actual stream.
I also have another follow-up question. There is a comparison, the predictive model versus the tree height, and it seems the house impact will be significantly reduced. And how many houses actually will be impacted for that type F buffer increase? Because it was 100 and then it's 150. How many more houses actually pulled in?
If you give me a moment, I can pull up this information. Can you hit escape? Okay. So can you see the screen? Okay. So the total number, I can give you an idea of what would be fully encumbered, which is 80 to 100%. Under the current regulations, it's 34 properties are impacted. With the updated stream buffers going from, so this is this is where one of the type N streams had a 25-foot buffer, one had a 50-foot buffer, and then the fish habitat streams had a 100-foot buffer. So fully encumbered is 34 properties. Under the updated, it goes up to 143 that are fully encumbered, and that's because you are now increasing both type ends to 100 feet, so from 25 to 100 and from 50 to 100. So there's going to be an impact to parcels, but the overall number is roughly the same compared between the two without doing some math. So it's a slight increase with the updated numbers. When you go to site potential tree height, you're looking at almost fully encumbered 1,100 parcels. So a significant jump from 143 to all the way to 1,100.
Yeah, I can see obviously that the tree height is going to pull much more, but even just, I guess, can I summarize it, say, the code change from current to the proposed, the change on the type F and S, it actually will have about 20% more impacted. I'm thinking we send out like 500 letters. I mean, all those total, the 143 versus 34.
And
That's probably roughly 20%-ish.
Yeah, out of the total number, yeah.
That may have, for those people, that 143 that are now fully impacted, I wonder if that might actually be a blessing in disguise for them, because if that means that they now have an easier job getting a reasonable use exception to build that addition in the buffer than before, that might serve them.
And I should also add too, because this map doesn't distinguish when you talk about like functionally disconnected buffers, or you have a roadway that goes in there. That 143 is the high. That's not taking into consideration roads or significant development that may occur between a property and the stream itself. So that 143 is the high end. It's once you start implementing the code and you utilize that isolated buffer provision, that number may go down.
And this also doesn't account for something that we heard during the open house portion too, was that there may be locations that are mapped by DNR as being fish bearing. That once the location is actually reviewed and surveyed by a wetland biologist, that it might turn out not to be a fish bearing stream, and it might be a 100-foot buffer instead of 150. So.
Any other questions?
Sorry, the last one. When we do the current recommendation we have, does that need also to be departing? I mean, I guess extra filing requirement for us to no. Okay.
No. It's about the deviating from best available science. No.
Okay, we will move to the public comment period. So if anybody would like to make a comment on the proposed changes in the critical areas ordinance, now's your opportunity. Okay, nobody is raising their hand, so we'll close the public comment period. And with that, I believe we can close the public hearing. So the public hearing to receive comments on the proposed update to the critical area ordinance is now closed at 7:13 PM. We'll make it official with the gavel.
Chair Gatzek, if I may make a note from the original, because this 110-foot buffer at Lake Boren, that was a suggestion that came from a public comment between the time of the packet and now. It would be an amendment to the motion if the commission wishes to include that, just so you know. So we've put it on the screen for you. With the actual motion would be if you would like to keep the buffer around Lake Boren at the 110 feet officially in the code.
What is the alternative? How is it written now?
As it's written now, that that would be the 150, well, there'd be some ambiguity, and the 150-foot type F stream could take precedence depending on who's reading the code. So this adds just an additional level of clarity that Lake Boren is 110 feet.
What buffer were we using in previous meetings when we were talking about a buffer on Lake Boren?
The wetland is 110 feet, but because the best available science and the gap analysis showed the 150 feet for the type F stream for the fish and wildlife habitat conservation areas, we needed to make it clear that Lake Boren was 110 feet.
So that sounds like a good idea. Anybody on the commission see it differently? Okay. So do we have to,
So if when you get to making motions, I just wanted to say that we need to make the motion as amended from tonight's presentation, as it's written on the screen right now. It should be on the screens in front of you too. If you're ready to entertain motions, if not, that's fine too. But I
so
just
the
wanted
motion
to
on the
put that in.
screen is the one that we just said would be a good idea?
Yes.
Oh, good. All right. Well, commissioners, it's now time to make well, we have a question here from Vice Chair.
I do have a question. I'm a little bit unprepared to vote on this because what's the purpose of the work study with the council? The study session with the council next Tuesday?
Well, I'm not sure that, if that, do we officially have that scheduled?
Yes.
Okay. I believe it's the same purpose that we had with this study session before our meeting today is, but substitute the council for the general public, where they get a chance to spend more time hearing this, probably the same presentation, and getting familiar with the content.
My concern is if we vote on a recommendation now, it won't take in any input from the council. Is that an issue?
The council may amend the recommendation from the planning commission if they have additional requirements. They can also hold their own public hearing should they wish to.
Thank you for that answer.
Okay, would anyone like to make a motion on the critical areas ordinance update?
Okay. I move to recommend for city council approval adoption of ordinance number 2026-683, critical areas ordinance update, as amended to apply a 110-foot buffer to Lake Boren. All in favor?
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, is there any more discussion about it? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes unanimously. That brings us to general business and the work plan discussion. I'm afraid Associate Planner Tyler, I think, is under the weather. So, Director Fitzgibbons?
I will do my best. I have no way to control the screen. Let me move computers. I'm gonna, excuse me for just a moment. All right, so thank you, Doug and Katie, for being here tonight. We don't really have a presentation. This is the proposed work plan for this year. Hopefully commissioners had an opportunity to read through it in the packet. I was just gonna kind of walk through what we have on here, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask. If you think we should, nothing is set in stone, we can move items around or change the dates as well. As you're aware, we've already started working on the nonconformance requirements, and those particularly require around the requirements for where the threshold is for a nonconformance requirement. If you recall, right now it's based on 50% of the. Sorry, Councilmember Blakely, is everything okay? Okay, okay, cool. Okay. Anyway, so the nonconformance requirements are really going to be specific to natural disasters, fire and whatnot, emergency situations, and then also looking at changing the threshold for when you have to bring your property and your home completely up into compliance. Right now, just a sneak preview, it's being written to talk about, instead of the appraised value of the improvements, which would be just the home itself, based on the assessors, it would be based on appraisal of the entire property, or the assessment on the entire property, whichever is greater. So that definitely gives a lot more room to do those home improvements, which have gotten so expensive since the 90s when that code was written. So that's what we're looking at our next meeting. The sign code is based on findings in case law, showing that our current sign regulations are not quite as specific as they could be. So looking at those regulations, Associate Planner Tyler Coyle will be bringing that to everybody. We're looking at kicking off small cells again. If those of you who were here in 2023 and remember Daniel Kenny coming in and talking about those, we just need to wrap that code up and get it in. It's mostly written by Mr. Kenny and his law firm, Ogden Murphy Wallace, and it's based on federal code. So that we're only looking at a couple of meetings for that once we can get it started. We're also looking at starting the downtown standards conversation, and we think that would be good to start this spring, likely looking at what our outreach efforts would look like and maybe putting some parameters around that. Then in terms of comprehensive plan amendments, we have to offer this opportunity every year. So we'll see if there's anybody who wants to change the comp plan, or if we want to change the comp plan in any way this year. Those applications are due before July 15th. We have to start a climate element. So we're going to dig back into the comprehensive plan. I noticed when I was reading through the policy recently, the policy recommendations, that we are looking at trying to plan for net zero emissions by 2050 it is. So we have 25 years to get to net zero, which is a relatively short amount of time. So this will be a really interesting process that will be involving Public Works with a lot, doing multimodal transportation analyses. And then, like every other year, we are putting forth the housekeeping item if we need it and if we have time. There are other items that may come forward from council, especially as we talk through the work plan next Tuesday at the study session. But right now, these are the items that kind of came to the talk of our list for this year. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chair Gatzek.
Any questions about the proposed work plan? If it looks good to you, would someone like to move that we recommend it to the council?
I recommend the 2026 Planning Commission work plans as proposed for the city council approval.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion, further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, it passes unanimously. We are now at the additional public comment period. Going once, going twice, going 3 times. No one from the audience would like to comment, so we'll close the additional public comment period and bring us to the planning calendar. So on Tuesday, February 3rd is the council study session, which is at 6 o'clock, I believe.
Yes.
Yes. That is, so recommended that you come, but it's not required. I mean, we're not going to be taking any action at that. Our regular planning commission meeting in February is on the 25th. And then a couple days after that, on Friday the 27th, the city council is going to hold an all-day retreat. And they may invite us to be there for an hour of that day. I don't think they've yet settled on their agenda, so if that invitation comes, we'll make sure it gets out to all of us. And let's see, I believe Commissioner Lowe, you're going to be absent on the 3rd, you mentioned, but as far as I know, we'll have full attendance on the other meetings. So with that, we will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you all.
Not really.
Hopefully it warms up a little bit.
I know. I fly to Dallas tomorrow.
Oh, golly, I'm trying to get it.
They haven't, yeah, everybody has been home, everyone's been in the office all week, so I don't know what, I might, you know, hopefully it'll be fine, but you never know. And then from there to, Washington DC for 4 days. I have to definitely bring my winter clothes. Bye.
Bye, Lynn.
We'll see.
I like Charlie's joke, by the way.
Pardon me?
Charlie's joke about something about sitting on
Oh,
the left.
sitting on the left.
Never been called out before.
Outstanding.
Pretty funny.
Outstanding, yeah. Very funny. Have a good trip, sweetie, okay?
Actually, I have a question. In terms of public space camping.
No, we were supposed to, and Rob, that was the first thing Rob was supposed to do, and got elected.
So we
We don't. What happened is Burien got sued and some other cities got sued, so we put it off. And of course, now you know the state's proposing, so, you know, we're stuck, we don't have anything in force that could go against that.
should